Imagine a God who desires nothing more than to cease existing, a creator whose ultimate goal is self-destruction. This isn't a theological twist or a sci-fi plotline. It's the core of Philipp Mainländer's unsettling and revolutionary argument for atheism. Mainländer didn't just reject the idea of God, he reimagined God in a way that questions the very foundation of existence itself. And what he proposed is a perspective so radical, so counterintuitive, that it leaves us asking whether the meaning we seek in life is built on an illusion. Before we dive into Mainländer's vision, let's start with a universal question: why is there something rather than nothing? It's a question philosophers and theologians have wrestled with for centuries. Most answers point to a creator, a being that willed the universe into existence. But for Mainländer, this explanation wasn't enough. He saw the existence of the universe not as a product of divine will, but as evidence of divine death. Yes, death. According to Mainländer, God once existed, but in an act of ultimate self-negation, God chose to annihilate himself, creating the universe as the aftermath of his own destruction. Think about the implications of this idea. If the universe is the residue of a dying God, what does that say about the nature of existence? For Mainländer, it suggests that existence itself is fundamentally tragic. Life, in his view, is not the unfolding of divine purpose, but the slow unraveling of a cosmic wound. And this leads us to the heart of his unsettling argument for atheism. If God's ultimate act was to cease to exist, then belief in God becomes a contradiction. We are left not with a living deity, but with the traces of one that is gone. Here's where it gets even more provocative. Mainländer believed that the universe's very structure reflects this divine self-destruction. He saw entropy, the gradual decline of order into chaos, as a clue that the universe is in a state of decay, moving inevitably toward nothingness. From the largest galaxies to the smallest cells, everything is breaking down. For Mainländer, this isn't a cause for despair, it's a call to recognize the true nature of reality. Life, he argued, is not about reaching for eternal meaning, but about understanding the finite, transient nature of existence.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
So how does this challenge the traditional idea of God? Most religious frameworks describe God as eternal, perfect, and unchanging. But Mainländer's vision flips this on its head. In his view, God wasn't eternal, God was temporary. God wasn't perfect, God was incomplete. And God wasn't unchanging, God was a being who chose to end his own existence. This is atheism not as denial, but as reinterpretation, a perspective that replaces divine permanence with divine impermanence. Let's pause here for a moment. What does it mean to believe in a God who no longer exists? What does it mean to live in a world that is the residue of divine annihilation? For Mainländer, it means rethinking everything we assume about purpose, morality, and hope. If life is the product of a dying God, then perhaps our search for meaning isn't about aligning with divine will, but about coming to terms with the absence of it. Now, let's turn to Mainländer's view of humanity. If God's act of self-destruction gave rise to the universe, what does that mean for us? Mainländer believed that human beings inherit this divine impulse towards self-negation. He saw life as a paradox. On the one hand, we strive to preserve ourselves; on the other, we are drawn toward rest, silence, and ultimately death. For him, this isn't a flaw in human nature. It's a reflection of the universe itself, a universe born from destruction and moving inevitably toward dissolution. This leads to a profound and unsettling question: what if the meaning of life isn't to resist this process, but to embrace it? Mainländer saw life as a journey toward reconciliation with death, not as an end to be feared, but as a return to the stillness from which we came. In his view, the ultimate act of wisdom is to let go of the illusion of permanence and accept the transient, fragile nature of existence. Here's where we start to feel the weight of Mainlander's argument. If he's right, then much of what we do in life, our ambitions, our attachments, even our beliefs, are attempts to deny the reality of impermanence. We build structures, create legacies, and seek comfort in the idea of eternity. But what if these are just distractions? What if true freedom comes not from clinging to life, but from understanding its fleeting nature? Let's think about this practically. Have you ever held on to something, a relationship, a dream, an identity long past the point where it served you? Why do we do this? Mainlander would say it's because we're afraid to confront the reality of loss. We fear the emptiness that comes with letting go. But he would also say that this emptiness is where we find truth. It's in the act of letting go that we come closest to the essence of existence. To close this part, consider what it means to live in a world where God is not a presence, but an absence. What does it mean to seek meaning in a universe that is dissolving? For Mainlander, it means looking not to the heavens for answers, but to the ground beneath our feet. It means recognizing that life is not a gift from a living God, but a fleeting moment in a vast, unfolding process of decay. In the next part, we'll explore the practical implications of Mainlander's philosophy, how his unsettling vision of existence challenges the way we live, love, and create. We'll also confront the question at the heart of his argument: if the universe is moving toward nothingness, what does it mean to live a good life? If Mainlander was right, and existence itself is the product of a dying God, then the way we live and define a good life takes on an entirely different meaning. Think about what motivates most people: ambition, legacy, the pursuit of happiness, the search for meaning. These are built on the assumption that life is a stage for progress, something eternal in its potential. But if the universe is in a state of decay, if everything is inevitably moving toward dissolution, then how do we measure what matters? Mainlander's answer is stark but surprisingly freeing. He believed that the good life isn't about striving for permanence or constructing something that will outlast us. It's about accepting the transient nature of existence and finding peace in the flow of that reality. Success isn't measured by how much you resist the inevitable, it's measured by how gracefully you move with it. This doesn't mean living passively. Mainlander wasn't advocating nihilism in the sense of giving up. Instead, he suggested something far more radical: live fully in the face of impermanence. When you stop clinging to the idea that life must have an eternal purpose, you can begin to experience it as it is: a fleeting moment of beauty, struggle, and connection. Think about how much of your life is driven by the need for permanence. You build careers, relationships, and identities with the hope that they'll last. But what happens when they don't? Mainlander saw suffering as an inevitable part of life, not because the universe is cruel, but because we resist its nature. Suffering arises when we demand stability from something that is inherently unstable. Let's break this down further. Imagine holding water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. Mainlander's philosophy is like opening your hands not to lose the water, but to stop fighting gravity. When you stop grasping, you stop suffering in the same way. This isn't about giving up, it's about aligning yourself with the flow of existence. But here's where things get more challenging. Mainlander believed that the impulse to resist impermanence is rooted deeply in human nature. He saw it as a reflection of the divine impulse that created the universe, a residual echo of God's initial act of self-negation. This means that the tension between striving and letting go is built into the fabric of existence itself. We inherit this tension as part of being alive. So how do we live well within this tension? Mainlander's answer is paradoxical: by striving without clinging. You can work toward goals, love deeply, and create meaning in your life, but you have to do so with the awareness that none of it is permanent. It's not about detachment in the sense of indifference. It's about detachment in the sense of freedom from the illusion that anything can last forever. Think about this practically. When was the last time you pursued something with everything you had, only to realize later that it didn't fulfill you in the way you thought it would? Mainlander would argue that this dissatisfaction comes from expecting too much permanence from temporary things. It's not that the pursuit was meaningless. It's that the meaning was in the act itself, not in the outcome. Here's a way to apply this the next time you're faced with a decision, whether it's about work, relationships, or personal growth. Ask not what will bring you lasting happiness, but what feels true right now. This isn't about being reckless or short-sighted. It's about recognizing that the only moment you truly have is the present one. Mainlander would say that living well means fully inhabiting that moment without attaching to what comes next. Now let's address one of the hardest parts of Mainlander's philosophy, his view of death. For him, death isn't the enemy of life. It's the completion of it. If the universe is the residue of divine self-destruction, then every living thing carries within it the same impulse toward rest. This doesn't mean we should seek death or glorify it, but it does mean we should stop fearing it as the ultimate negation. Mainlander saw death as a return to the stillness from which we came, a natural part of the process, not an interruption of it. This raises a profound question. If death is inevitable, what should we do with the time we have? Mainlander's answer is deceptively simple: live with intention. Recognize that your life, like the universe itself, is finite. Use that knowledge not to despair, but to focus on what truly matters. When you understand that time is limited, you stop wasting it on things that don't align with your values. Let's bring this back to the concept of meaning. Mainlander rejected the idea of an external, eternal purpose. For him, meaning isn't something you find, it's something you create. You give your life meaning through the choices you make, the relationships you nurture, and the experiences you embrace. And because everything is temporary, that meaning doesn't have to last forever to be real. Here's another practical exercise. Think about one thing in your life that you've been holding onto too tightly: a goal, a belief, or even a regret. What would happen if you loosened your grip? What if you let it evolve, change, or even fade? Mainlander believed that letting go doesn't mean losing. It means making space for something new to emerge. To sum up this section, Mainlander's philosophy challenges us to rethink what it means to live a good life. It's not about resisting the flow of existence or clinging to the illusion of permanence. It's about accepting life's impermanence and finding meaning in the transient, fleeting moments that make up our days. Let's take everything we've explored and confront the question that sits at the center of Mainlander's philosophy. If life and existence are rooted in impermanence, decay, and dissolution, what does freedom look like in such a world? Freedom, in Mainlander's view, isn't about escaping this reality. It's about embracing it. It's about seeing life for what it is and finding liberation in that clarity. Most people think of freedom as the absence of constraints, a life where everything goes your way, where suffering is minimized, and where permanence can somehow be achieved. Mainlander would call this a misunderstanding. For him, true freedom is the ability to face impermanence without denial. It's the courage to live fully, not despite the transience of life, but because of it. Let's make this more tangible. Think about the choices you've made in your life. How many of them were guided by the hope that something would last forever? A career, a relationship, a legacy. Now ask what happened when things didn't go as planned. Did it feel like freedom or did it feel like failure? Mainlander would say that these moments reveal the gap between illusion and reality. Freedom begins when you stop demanding eternity from things that are inherently temporary. This brings us to an unsettling but profound insight: life doesn't owe us permanence. The universe doesn't promise stability or meaning. Instead, it offers something far more dynamic: a constant state of flux, where change is the only certainty. Mainländer saw this not as a curse, but as an opportunity. When you let go of the need for permanence, you stop clinging to illusions. You start engaging with life as it is, not as you wish it to be. But this isn't easy. Mainländer understood that most people resist this kind of freedom because it's unsettling. It forces us to confront the fragility of everything we hold dear. It asks us to let go of the comforting stories we tell ourselves about purpose and eternity. Yet in that discomfort lies the potential for liberation. When you stop looking to the future for fulfillment, you start finding it in the present. Let's think about how this applies to relationships. Many of us approach relationships with the hope that they'll last forever. But what happens when they don't? Mainländer would argue that the problem isn't the impermanence of the relationship, it's the expectation that it should be permanent. What if we approach relationships not as something to possess, but as something to experience? What if we value the connection for what it is, rather than for how long it lasts? This shift doesn't make loss less painful, but it does make it less paralyzing. Mainlander's perspective also has implications for how we think about success. In a world of impermanence, success can't be about building something that lasts forever. It has to be about creating something meaningful in the moment. This doesn't mean you shouldn't have goals or aspirations. It means your sense of fulfillment can't depend on their permanence. Success, in Mainlander's view, is about how fully you engage with the process, not about whether the outcome endures. Here's a practical way to apply this. Think about a goal you're working toward right now. How much of your motivation comes from the hope that achieving it will give you lasting happiness? What if, instead, you focused on the process itself? What if the act of working toward the goal was the source of meaning, rather than the outcome? This shift changes everything. It frees you from the pressure to make things perfect, and allows you to focus on what truly matters: the experience of creating, learning, and growing. Mainländer also challenges us to rethink how we approach suffering. Most people see suffering as something to avoid at all costs. But Mainländer believed that suffering is an integral part of existence. It's not something to escape, but something to understand. He saw suffering as a reflection of the universe's inherent impermanence, a reminder that nothing is fixed and everything is in motion. But this isn't a call to glorify suffering. Mainländer wasn't suggesting that we seek it out or wallow in it. Instead, he was saying that suffering becomes less overwhelming when we stop fighting it. When we accept it as a natural part of life, we can start to learn from it. Suffering, in this view, is a teacher. It shows us where we're clinging too tightly, where we're resisting reality, and where we have the opportunity to grow. Think about a time in your life when you experienced deep pain or loss. What did it teach you? How did it change you? Mainländer would say that these moments, as difficult as they are, hold the potential for transformation. They strip away illusions and force us to confront what really matters. They remind us that life is fragile and fleeting, and that this fragility is what makes it beautiful. To live with this awareness requires a kind of bravery that most people avoid. It means stepping into the unknown, embracing impermanence, and letting go of the need for certainty. But in doing so, you find a freedom that is deeper and more authentic than anything the illusion of permanence can offer. You stop measuring your life by how much you achieve or how long things last, and you start measuring it by how fully you live. Let's return to the core of Mainlander's argument, the idea that the universe is the residue of divine self-destruction. If this is true, then life itself is an act of creation born from destruction. It's a reminder that endings and beginnings are not opposites but part of the same process. Every moment of loss carries within it the seed of something new, and every act of letting go creates space for something unexpected to emerge. This perspective doesn't erase the pain of impermanence, but it does reframe it. It shows us that meaning doesn't come from permanence or stability. It comes from how we engage with the fleeting, ever-changing nature of existence. Mainlander's philosophy invites us to live with an awareness that every moment is both a beginning and an ending, both fragile and full of potential. So what does freedom look like in a world without permanence? It looks like living without clinging, loving without possessing, and creating without demanding that what you make will last forever. It looks like finding meaning in the act of living itself, rather than in the hope of something eternal. And it looks like embracing the truth that impermanence isn't a flaw in the universe, it's its essence. Mainlander's argument is unsettling, because it asks us to let go of everything we think we know about meaning and purpose. But in doing so, it offers us something far more profound, the chance to live authentically, courageously, and freely in the face of impermanence. It's not about despair, it's about liberation. The question isn't whether life is fragile. It is. The question is what you'll do with that fragility, how you'll live, how you'll love, and how you'll love, and how you'll create meaning in the time you have. Because in a world defined by impermanence, the only thing that truly matters is how you choose to engage with it. And that choice is where your freedom lies,